always like to make sure that we're not getting too deep into our own bubble as Browns fans, right? It's easy to get caught up in conversations and not really check in. But when you're playing another team, it gives you a great opportunity to check out what's going on with the rest of the league. And in order to do that, I have Taylor Daw on today, who does a podcast about the Chicago Bears. Taylor, how are things going in Chicago? Because it feels like you guys are having the kind of season that maybe the Browns want to have next year.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been, honestly pretty surprising. I think there were expectations of this Bears team could win 7, 8 games, but we didn't know if right away, especially with the schedule. Looking preseason, I mean, it looked like a gauntlet from start to finish. It did end up being a little easier in the first half because of injuries, Joe Burrow not playing, Lamar not playing. Some of those games that looked harder we're a little bit easier. But I do think that it's been a season where you've seen a lot of positive things, especially offensively and with Ben Johnson. That's made a lot of Bears fans really excited for the future. The wild part is normally all we know is defense, and this year the defense has kind of just fallen apart, and the offense has kept them afloat for most of the year. So that's the weird part we're not used to. But it's been really fun to watch the progress of Caleb Williams, even through the roller coaster, some of the things that he's gotten better at and some of those boxes he's checked. Guys like, Roma Dunze, he started, flashing super early. He's gotten injured since then. Luther Burden's just been an absolute dog this season. He's so much fun to watch, and he just has bled into everything that's Chicago Bears. And so that's been really fun. But yeah, it's a little bit shocking, but it's you're in a place where you're 9-4 and you have the chance to still win the division and make the postseason. And that's what you want to be talking about mid-December.
You make an interesting point about the schedule, because I always tell people this whenever they see the schedule at the beginning of the year, like, oh my God, we got the toughest schedule in the division or in the league. And it's always, you never know until the season starts, because somebody could be out that week, make their game a lot easier. Like the Browns, everybody was panicking in Cleveland how tough the Browns schedule is. The Browns schedule is so bad this year that's why they might get the number 1 overall pick, because they have the lowest strength of schedule of all the teams in the top 10. So it's like, you never know. The AFC North was terrible this year. Like, you just never really know until you get started. People would assume that the Bears schedule was going to be tough. You guys go through the AFC North this year, right? Because it's the North versus North this year. So
so that's what we had, the AFC North, and then we had the NFC East. And so it's been the thing where it's like the Eagles all of a sudden kind of plateaued this season. Cowboys started off terrible, got a little bit better. And then you talk about, so that division in general kind of underwhelmed. And then the AFC North underwhelmed. The NFC North, I think, was looked at to be one of the better ones. And they're still, it looks like they could get 3 teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's like when you catch a team at the right time or wrong time of the season, you never really know. I mean, the Browns caught like the Bengals when Joe Burrow was healthy, right? We're like the one team that caught him. So it's like you just never really know. Like Lamar's terrible right now, but he's probably not going to be terrible for the rest of the year. Yeah. So it's probably like a good time to catch him. It's always all these things that people never think about in the offseason. They don't think that's possible. It's like it absolutely always happens every year. But you were talking about Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is interesting. Because I'm a big fan of Caleb Williams coming out of college. And I think it's interesting, right? Because sometimes you get the number 1 overall pick with the quarterback and it happens right away and it's Magic Street and you're just living a dream and everybody's all happy and singing songs and all of that. And then you get sometimes the experience with the number 1 overall pick where you're like, hey, it could be good. Like, it could be good, right? Like, I just don't know if it's going to be exactly what we want, especially when it's somebody like Caleb Williams, who had all this hype coming out, people comparing him to Patrick Mahomes, which is always unfair to a young prospect. And then you add on top of all of that, people's feelings about how Caleb Williams conducts himself on and off the field, and their takes there. He becomes this lightning rod for controversy. But I'm learning this with SHEDEUR, where SHEDEUR is a little bit of a lightning rod for controversy, but then you see how SHEDEUR behaves and you're like, nothing controversial about him at all. Yeah. It's everything else that there's everybody else who talks about him that's controversial. Is it a similar thing with Caleb, where it's like the actual story of covering Caleb Williams is not as interesting as what the noise would make you think?
Yeah, Caleb is fascinating. And I'll say I was one of the people in the beginning that wanted to keep Justin Fields and not draft Caleb Williams. I was in that world, which looking back now, I'm glad that I was wrong in that situation. And they did go for that trade and get rid of Justin Fields. But I do think that when you live in this world with Caleb, where yes, like he cries after a game and he paints his nails and he brings matchas to every game, and like it's just all those storylines just seem so crazy. And the more you cover him and the more you learn about him, the sillier they feel. And
Mhm.
I live in Jacksonville, and he trains in Jacksonville during the off season. One of the guys I work with at my radio station is in the group that trains him every off season. And so from the beginning, he would have conversations with me about like a lot of this isn't true. Like a lot of this stuff isn't Caleb Williams. Like Caleb Williams is super cool, down to earth, like just loves football. He's obsessed with football, and that's what it is. He's a gamer. That's all he cares about. That's all he wants to do is win. And so, yes, I think sometimes that comes off to other people as maybe like arrogance or just being that competitive level that he has, and the obsession for football for other people is just like, oh, why is he crying? It's because he cares. Like he's like actually wants to win this football game, and he has a close relationship with his family, and so that family means a lot. And he sees his mom in the crowd after a
Mhm.
loss, and it's the last time he's going to play at USC. And so like all those things factor in, and he's an emotional guy. You see it in games, you see it on the sideline. We in the beginning of games, this is one of the things that I think has been one of the bigger issues is it takes him a minute to settle into games. And I think the emotional side of him kind of takes over in the beginning. And then halfway through the second quarter, you see a little bit more of a stable Caleb Williams. And if that starts happening earlier, I think that you're seeing a complete game. But he's a great guy. I mean, he loves Chicago. I think he honestly came to the perfect city because it's a city that will embrace you as long as you win. If you start losing, then it can get rough pretty quickly. They'll turn on you
Mhm.
fast. But if you win, that's a city that will embrace all of your quirks. Look at Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman married himself and wore dresses and painted his nails and colored his hair, and the city freaking obsessed with Dennis Rodman. So it's like they don't care how weird you are if you win games.
That's the great thing about Great Lakes cities, right? And I think people don't understand because, like, Cleveland gets thrown in with like the Midwest, and sometimes Chicago does. It's like Great Lakes cities are their own bees because we can be as angry as the East Coast, sometimes much angrier than the East Coast, right? Because we feel like we don't even get that respect. Like we feel like the East Coast gets the respect for being angry fans. We feel like we're slept on for our level of angry. Like, we gonna show you how angry we could get. But like that's the thing about those Great Lakes cities. If you are great, we will embrace anything. We just want to win. It's sports towns, right? Like
Mhm.
Chicago's a big sports town. Same thing with like Detroit. Same thing with Cleveland, Buffalo as well, right? Big sports town feel. But when they're losing, like, look, we care. So,
Mhm.
the same way Caleb gonna cry after a loss, we gonna boo after a loss, right? Like that's how we get through it. And that's just I think PR managers got to tell them, hey, this is just how it is. It ain't personal.
Yeah.
It's just how they go. But you brought up stuff with Caleb, and I feel like he's so Baker Mayfield coded. I don't think people get there because, like, obviously they present very differently, right? Baker
Mhm.
Mayfield, more like, traditionally drives pickup trucks with his shirt off and no feet, no shoes on and stuff like that, right? Caleb Williams wouldn't have the same kind of way about him, but still two very confident guys. Sometimes comes off as a little bit cocky, right? A lot of media attention, fandom around them, who have had these moments where you're like, oh, he's too excited this week, right? Baker Mayfield, especially early on when he got with Kevin, it was a lot of stuff like, oh, can we keep Baker in control? Can he stay on time? I think you guys are having like similar conversations that we were having with Baker in 2020. I'm going to be interested in how it all plays out with Chicago. But also with Caleb Williams and the parallel with SHEDEUR, I think it's interesting because I don't know how long you've been doing this, but I've only been doing this since like 2018. So this is my first time seeing like a generational shift in like the players coming into the league, especially at the position of quarterback. Because what Caleb Williams truly is the first Gen Z quarterback, right? Like he's
Mhm.
the first one that feels truly like what people get mad about Gen Z, right? In the
Yeah.
same ways that, I don't know who the first millennial, like maybe Ben Roethlisberger was like the truly first like millennial quarterback where it's
Mhm.
like, he don't care about nothing, dude. Like, I think that's Caleb Williams for Gen Z. I think for SHEDEUR, he's the first parasocial
Mhm.
quarterback in the NFL where he has such a parasocial following because people have watched him grow up
Yeah.
underneath the prime banner. And it creates these interesting situations where you're like, they're being covered, but people have issues with them that are bigger than like
Yeah. They should
just
be.
what their sport is or what
Yeah.
they're actually doing at work. How has that been to cover and to navigate with Caleb, right? Because I imagine it has to be exhausting, like separating actual criticism you have of Caleb versus a lot of stuff that comes in afterwards, which is he can't make passes because he paints his nails or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about that first Gen Z quarterback. He's also one of the first in that first group of NIL college quarterbacks
Mm.
too. I do think that factors into some things too, because we're seeing these guys that are now from high school to college getting offered money to play football, and that so I do think a little bit of a certain, and that's where I think some of the arrogance comes from, because they have this level where it's like, I've been doing this and getting paid to do this for a long time. And then now you're telling me that certain things I'm doing are wrong. And I think that sometimes they have to get that out of their head. And I know that was some of Caleb's things. Caleb was like, this is what I do really well, and I don't want to lose that. And I believe I don't want to lose the Houdini side of Caleb Williams, because that's what makes him him. If you take away the magical things that Patrick Mahomes does, then you're not talking about Patrick Mahomes anymore. But you do also have to reel things in and kind of play in structure when you're asked to, and to start checking some of the boxes. And I mentioned the ones of, like, not taking so many sacks, that pressure to
Mm-hmm.
sack ratio, throwing the ball away when you need to, just the decision making. And those are things we've seen get better. But when you're talking about separating that from the other things, I think Chicago media and Chicago has and fans have done a great job of doing that. They've almost embraced it, where it's just kind of like, it's Caleb, like, let's see what color Caleb's nails are today, because this is like a street. Okay, when they're orange, we win. When they're not, like, we lose. And like that, it's become almost that. Outside, it turns into a thing where, and this is just me following on Twitter, or when you're watching national broadcast or whatever the case may be. Anytime I do a podcast with an opposing person, it's kind of that conversation of, okay, well, does he care about all of those other things too much? And my answer is always no. I think that Caleb is one of the most obsessed with football quarterbacks that's in the NFL right now. Not saying there's not others, because there definitely is. But when you talk about that comparison with Baker, Baker said it himself recently, like, when they love you, when you can be that person when you're winning and they'll love it. If you're that person when you're losing, they hate it and they mock it and everything you do is wrong. And that's kind of the weird thing is, the Bears are winning right now and they still haven't shifted to that other side of Caleb. And I think because of the inconsistency, that's part of
Mm-hmm.
it. But it is, I think, if you make the postseason and you win a playoff game, I think eventually maybe some of that stuff will become more fun to people, rather than here's this kid that cries at USC, to, oh, this kid can actually ball and play some, win a playoff game, and who cares if he paints his nails. There's always going to be those people, because I think that people like to hate, and I think that they like to criticize things that have nothing to do with football. But I do think that Caleb has something in him that does attract, and SHEDEUR has it too. It just, they have personalities, and some people don't like the big personalities. They want the football, that quarterback to be the quarterback, and like a Drew Brees and whatever. Tom Brady was so boring until he went to Florida, and then he moved to Florida and got a little wild, started drinking tequila, and was fun. But I think before that, he's kind of boring. Like, he wasn't running his mouth a ton, and like doing all of these quirky, fun things and interviews and calling people out. And both SHEDEUR and Caleb are that. And so it kind of adds a level of limelight on you, which they bring to themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting too with the Baker comp, because like so many of these things people were just like, because NIL's the thing that people are like, it's ruining football, right?
Yeah.
But then I'm like, Baker Mayfield had those same issues. He didn't get paid a dime in college, right? He wasn't even on scholarship one of them years, right?
Yeah.
But he came in, he was like, no, I don't want to do, like, that was pretty much why it broke down in Cleveland. He had so many coaches at the beginning, and then he got Kevin, but by the time he had got Kevin, he had like 3 offensive coordinators. So he was like, if I don't want to do this anymore, then I don't have to. And then that became a whole thing. And then he ended up with the Browns going after Deshaun Watson. And it's like, you can't even blame NIL on that. It's just like, hey, man, good old-fashioned ego sometimes just gets in the way there. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. It's funny how people can separate the two ideas, right? Shador, Baker, and Caleb, but I think they're all closely connected in a
Mhm.
way because they're all quarterbacks that people had a disproportionate amount of conversation about relative to what they've been able to do on the field. And the dynamic too with the draft that Caleb was in, right? He's in that draft, and it's like, well, Jaden Daniels, he was that magical story for the
Mhm.
Washington Commanders, and then you're watching Drake May right now, and I think it's funny. It's like Drake May gets to the top of the AFC, it's empowering, but like Caleb Williams does the same thing. They're like, put a shirt on, Caleb, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a completely different way that they're being received upon, but it's like in the same way that Baker had to deal with, like, yeah, he was the number one overall pick in a draft that had Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. I mean, Caleb's having to deal with that too, to where it's like, to those people who drafted you in Chicago, there's probably always going to be that feeling of like, man, what if we got Jaden?
Yeah.
Man, what if we had gotten Drake May, right? And they're not going to really be able to appreciate what it is you bring to the table, because that was part of what played in Cleveland was like, yeah,
Mhm.
Baker's good, but he's not Josh. He's
Yeah.
not Lamar. And it took for him to get to a place that didn't draft him to be able to appreciate him. And I wonder if that's going to be a similar story for Caleb in the long run here, because it's like, it is tough to be the
Yeah.
number one overall pick, and people are constantly talking about the number two, number
Yeah.
three overall pick. Maybe if he goes in the next, like in last year's draft, he's clearly the best quarterback. Maybe people have different conversations, but because of that dynamic, like, how has that affected how people have talked about him?
Yeah, I think the number one, you use the word number one overall pick. You use the word generational. You start linking him to guys like Patrick Mahomes, and automatically the standard is higher immediately. And that's a lot of things that you go back to last year. It was such a disaster in Chicago. I mean, it was Shane Waldron didn't hardly make it 7 weeks, the offensive play caller. So they go to the second, your second offensive play caller after that. By the end of the season, he went through three offensive play callers. Now he's obviously on his fourth with Ben Johnson, and he hasn't played 30 games. Like, he just hit 30 games. So I think people don't realize sometimes all of the intricate things that go into it. And I reported last year, one of the things that ended up going like kind of viral, I didn't even mean for it to, but when I mentioned that he trains here, one of the guys that trained him was telling me kind of mid-season, right after Shane Waldron was fired, that Caleb was having just such an issue with Shane and the communication between them and the coaching staff and Flus, that he called the training group down here and was like, hey, these guys, like, they're not helping. They're not going over film with me. This is a disaster. Can I hire somebody? I'm going to build a film room at my house. Can I hire somebody to like come over and just go over film with me? And that was where he was at midway through his rookie season. And so it was such a disaster that I do think certain things regressed during that time last year. And I think Ben Johnson had a lot of things that he kind of had to reel back in, mechanical things, mental things, just obviously the ups and downs of becoming a college to NFL quarterback in general. But I do think that Caleb's handled it well with all of the things that have happened, and having that attachment to being the first overall pick in a draft class that is talked about. I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks that came out of that. To your point, there's a ton that we're talking about. Bo Nix, we're talking about. You mentioned Drake May and Jaden Daniels. Those are more, but there's a ton. JJ McCarthy, who hasn't looked as good this season. That was another one that people were already saying 2 games into the season, Bears screwed up on that one too. But I think that at the end of the day, I don't know if the Bears fans or Bears organization are going to care what any of those other quarterbacks do if you're winning 10, 11 games. I just, if the Bears can end with 10, 11 games this season, I don't care what Drake May's doing in New England. Now, obviously, if you go win a Super Bowl, you'd be like, dang, that kind of sucks. But also, would that have happened here? I don't know, because if Drake May came here, what does that dynamic look like? You never really know. So I do think that it's unfortunate for guys drafted first overall, because they
Mm-hmm.
always have something extra lingering and kind of hanging over them of like, you're the guy that everybody said was supposed to be this next generational talent, and sometimes it doesn't happen as quick as people want. But the funny part too, and you said you were a fan of Caleb before, like the conversation also with Caleb coming into the draft was he's absolutely credible and has a really high ceiling, but he doesn't know how to play in structure, and he doesn't know how to do this and this. And there were so many checkpoints of there's whoever has him, they still have a project. And so I think people forgot that part of it, that he was supposed to be a bit of a project, but his ceiling was higher than the other guys. And so what we're hoping right now is you're still have a long way until you hit that ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
but you'll hit it.
Yeah, it's like I think there's always going to be some level of like, yeah, you can get Caleb to be on time, but understand you probably need to let him do his thing too. Like he needs to get to a point to where his fundamentals are strong enough to where it's like, like what Pat Mahomes did, right?
Yeah.
Where Pat Mahomes got to a place where he was finally comfortable and he can like, all right, I don't got to go downfield all the time. I could really just attack space. That's what Caleb needs to get to, but that's easier said than done in the NFL. Right?
Yeah.
If it were always as easy as it sounds, we have a lot more quarterbacks in the league, and maybe we're not breaking our necks every time one comes out to get them. Now, I want to ask this question from a Chicago perspective, right? Because you're catching the Browns while SHEDEUR is the quarterback. From the outside looking in, do you feel like this is a good or bad time to catch him? Because, SHEDEUR had that game. He won Rookie of the Week, 4 touchdowns. The Browns also lost to the Tennessee Titans. So I want to know what your perspective is coming into this game.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 sides of it. There's always that term, the trap game, which has been thrown around a lot this week. And I think anytime you have a team that has few wins and another team that has a lot more wins, that conversation is always going to come in. I think that the more you start to talk about it, the more Bears fans and Bears media have talked about it, you start to be like, okay, let's settle down a little bit and look at the things that the Bears have done and the opponents that they've faced recently. When you talk about Pittsburgh, when you talk about Philly, when you talk about Green Bay, and they won 2 of those barely, Caleb throws a pick at the end of the game, seconds away from tying against Green Bay at Lambeau. So they're playing really good football against good and pretty good teams. So I do think that you have to kind of sometimes put into that perspective. But I always think that there's a little bit of a knowing when you are facing a quarterback like SHEDEUR, because he's a young quarterback and you're seeing him kind of do things better week to week. And there's an unpredictability there, especially with the defense that has and / is as beat up as the Bears have been. So you have some question marks there. You also know that you're going to it's a game you almost have to win. After that, you have the Packers, the Niners, and the Lions. So it's a game where it's like, get that number 10 win, because I don't even know if 11 wins get you into the playoffs at this point. So win the ones that you should, and the Browns feel like a should. But this NFL season's been absolutely insane. So that's always also lingering in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I think the Browns are kind of like, if you follow college football this year, playing Penn State or South Carolina, where you're like, they stink, but they can be good randomly one game, right? And that's kind of the Browns stink, but then their defense was so good one game. They beat the Packers with no quarterback help one week, right?
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, it's like, that's kind of how the Browns season has gone. We are capable of losing to 2 one-loss teams, right? The Jets, the Titans. I think we lost to the Jets with giving up 14 yards to receivers. It was just like a horrific loss, right? Yeah. But then we're capable of beating the Packers. They almost beat the Ravens, right? Like they're one of those teams where it's like you don't really want to sleep on, because Myles Garrett can get anybody, and if you start turning the ball over, and then I think SHEDEUR's good enough in the red zone to where you can capitalize on that, you're gonna have a rough day. Yeah. And they're a young, talented team too. I think that's the big thing with Cleveland. They're gonna have youth mess up things for them sometimes. We saw it in that game versus Tennessee. Youth was part of the reason why they didn't convert any of those 2-point conversions, because they fumbled the snap with their young center, like 3rd game in the league, 2nd year in the league. And then Quincy Judkins forgets the play call on the second 2-point conversion. You have to fumble by another rookie in Dylan Sampson, a bad interception by another rookie in SHEDEUR, right? A muff punt from a young special teams unit. The youth gets in the Browns' way, but also the youth is capable of some of those fantastic plays that we saw that were responsible for the Browns being able to make a comeback. So it's like, which end of that youth spectrum are the Browns going to hit this week? I think that's the big question. Are they going to make the mistakes, turn the ball over, and look like a very young team? Or is this one of those games where a young team just puts it together and gets a win on the road that you just completely didn't expect them to get? I assume that they're pointing to the danger, and luckily for the Chicago Bears, luckily but not luckily, right? When you got Myles Garrett on your team, nobody's sleeping, at least on the
Yeah,
offensive side of the
definitely
ball,
not.
on you, right? So they will prepare for the Browns and give them their best shot, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. Any last thoughts here before we end this?
Yeah, I'll just talk just playing off that a little bit when it comes to the youngness. That's been part of the Bears offense, I think, too. When you talk about it, you have Caleb Williams, obviously a year two quarterback, Rome, who's a year two wide receiver, Luther Burden, a year one wide receiver, Colson Loveland, a year one tight end, Kyle Mononga, a year one running back. So there's also a lot of youth. Our left tackle is a rookie too. So there's a lot of youth on the Bears side of the ball too, and I think that has been part of some of the growing pains. You've seen moments where you're like, okay, certain things click really well, and then you see two drops in a row, and then you see someone fall before they catch the ball, and then you see a false start or an illegal shift, and those are some of the clunky things that have really hurt the Bears. The Bears have the most like net lost penalty yards in the NFL. I want to say it was 250 before last week, so probably over 300 at this point when it comes to that. And so that's been a massive issue this year with that offense is when things kind of get going, they make mistakes that hurt them and back them up. And so that's some of the stuff that you hope gets shaken out in this final little stretch, but things for the Browns to look out for because you really can take advantage of the Bears offense in those situations when it comes to the youngness also.
All right, all right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and talking Browns Bears with us. Two teams in completely different places, parts of their season right now, but meeting at a compelling point that I think is going to be interesting football on Sunday. Want to thank you. Can you tell them where to find you?
Yeah, so it's Taylor Doll is at Taydoll1010XL on Twitter. You can find my podcast, Making Monsters, wherever you listen to your podcast. It's part of Second City Gridiron. If you'd like to listen to a little more stuff, I also host a show called Helmets and Heels on 1010XL in Jacksonville. I cover the Jags too, and then the college football down here is big in our world. So if you want a little bit of that stuff, that's where you'll find me.
Yeah, it's what Tallahassee, that area in the Panhandle,
So
right? So it's
I'm in Jacksonville, so we're like very northeast. But yeah, we're the home of the Gators and flagship of the Jaguars, our main two teams, but big SEC country over here.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm in Georgia, so
Okay.
yeah,
So
it's big. Yeah, the SEC is bigger than the NFL in some
Oh
places
yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be fun to see how this game plays out. Again, thank everybody for watching. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.